We are going to do a seminar, the past, the present, and the future of this industry. And I would like you to please put your hands together for the MC of this evening, Mr. Al Magliano.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The past, the present, and the future. What do we have on this panel here? I think we have all three. So what I want to do is I want to throw it out. First, I want to throw it out to Richie Conte. What was it like when you walked into your first club? How old were you?
19.
You got to have the mic.
19.
And where was it?
Community Gardens in Jamaica, Queens.
Do you remember who the DJ was?
I don't remember his name.
You don't remember his name?
No.
Okay, but tell us a little bit about that experience and what it was like when you walked into that club in the early days.
Well, are you talking about when I first started playing?
Well, the early days of disco.
All right. Well, I'll tell you from the perspective of Brooklyn with this DJ behind me, Richie Condina. So it was the end of the 60s. It was the beginning of the 70s. There was still a big feeling of protest. People were against the Vietnam War. It seemed like this new thing with this music and these clubs where instead of ripped jeans and old shirts, it was the girls were dressing up in these nice dresses and high-heel shoes. The guys had on these baggy pleated pants. It looked like a throwback from the 40s. And the music was funk, soul, R&B. But what was very interesting in those early days was that the music still had a feel of protest and social consciousness. But we weren't playing it or dancing into it because that was like it wasn't like we had an agenda. It was just part of the repertoire. And I thought that was really significant in those days. So that's my answer.
Okay. Let me move over to Jerry. Jerry, what's your earliest recollection of when you started to realize that disco, I mean, we didn't call it disco back in the late 60s, early 70s, but what was your first recollection and thought of what was happening and when it was happening and how it started?
You know, I want to take it back. I probably want to take it back a step before actually the disco era, and I'm probably a couple years older than many of the people. But my first recollection of the influence of music and dance and everything goes back to the '60s, the early Motown era. I used to sneak out as a teenager and go to Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Fox Theater, to see the Murray the K shows. If anybody's old enough to see Murray the K, yeah. And you saw all the original Motown acts back then. I mean, the original acts. And that told me so much about the culture, what it took to get people into the music, the choreography, the styling, and all the classic. I mean, it was real talent, real talent back then. Fast forward to the disco era. I got a late start, and again, I'll take it to the business side of things because I was very fortunate. I got married at 19 years old. I had 3 kids by the time I was 24.
3 that he knew about.
And so I actually had I quote, a day job that provided a lot of security for me and my family. I had a salary, an expense account, a company car, and so forth. And I quit to be a disco DJ at the Windjammer in Saddlebrook, New Jersey. People thought I had lost my mind. They said, Jerry, you're married, you got a family. How are you going to support them? On $50 a night as an independent contractor. No guaranteed salary, certainly no benefits. There went my company car and my expense account. I threw it all away to take on this passion that I had of playing music, entertaining people, and taking on the responsibility. And it was more than being just a DJ. You were an entrepreneur. You were part of the business because what you did creatively and business-wise dictated whether or not that club stayed open, whether people came back, whether they lined up to come and hear you play music. And I think the people in this room represent those people who succeeded in doing that. That's why you are the legends of vinyl. Because it did, because you understood that it was a business, you played to the crowd, but you also understood the business aspect that it involved satisfying people who are willing to pay admission to come hear you play, who spent some money on drinks and stuff like that to keep those people in business, and kept this amazing concept of 2 turntables and a mixer alive for 4 decades now, or more than 4 decades. So congratulations to everybody in the room.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Now I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist. Now, you know, when you think of American Bandstand, who do you think of? Dick Clark. When you think of The Twist, who do you think of?
Chubby Checker.
Chubby Checker. When you think of a disco sound system, who do you think of?
Alex Rosner.
Alex Rosner. No question. So, Alex, give us your perspective on what it was like in the early days of disco, or the late 60s, early 70s. What were the sound systems like? We all know, but tell us again.
Hopefully his mic is working.
Maybe not. I think it's my luck. My first club was in 1964.
Wow.
And it was just before the World's Fair. And it was actually a restaurant on Northern Boulevard in Queens. And the sound system was terrible. So my best friend and I, we went there for dinner, and he put my business card under the ashtray so the owner would see it. And at least I put my business card. He told me to leave my business card, so I did. When I walked to get my wife's coat, he took my business card, took his wife's lipstick, and wrote on the back, "Your sound system stinks." And he went up to the owner and he handed him the card. So the owner comes up to me and he says, "You're right. Come back tomorrow and fix my system."
Guido.
It was. So I came back the next day and fixed the system. Sounded a little better. And I remember he paid me before I even finished, which was very unusual. Very unusual. And I was very, very excited. I had no knowledge at all about the music, about the disco music, because I came from I wanted to be a musician. I played like 7 instruments at that time. My mother said, "No way can you be a musician. It's an ungrateful profession. Use music as your hobby and do something else. You like to fiddle, be an engineer." So I went to school, studied engineering, and used music as my hobby. But when the World's Fair came along, I heard rhythm and blues. And by the time I heard rhythm and blues, I had been dancing. I got into Latin dancing. I loved dancing, so I used to go dancing once or twice a week. And then all of a sudden I heard rhythm and blues, and the harmony in the music is what struck me. So when people asked me to do a system, I knew what to do. It was instinctive. I had no trouble of any kind, and it started right up. I was moonlighting at that time, 1965, 66. By 67, my wife said to me, "You know, few men find something they like to do. Why don't you go into it full time? If you don't do it now, you're going to be sorry 30 years from now." And that was good advice. I took her advice. I quit my job on December 31, 1967. And my boss said to me, "You won't miss us for 1 minute." And he was right. I didn't miss them. Business grew. And all of a sudden, the clubs grew. And you might say I was in the right time at the right place. That's all it was. There was nothing really special about what I did. I just happened to fall into it, and I knew the basics. So every time I went into a club, it just kind of, the room talked to me, and I figured out what to do, and it came natural. There was no doing. And so it turned out to be. And I only did things that, for instance, that Bozak mixer, before that, there was no Bozak mixer. There was only mono mixers, and I thought the stereo was the way to go, so I had to make my own. I had no choice. But once the Bozak mixer came out, and I helped them with that, testing it a little bit, that was my input to that mixer. I suggested that he make one because he had a mono mixer for voice, and I said, you can take this mixer and make it into a stereo disco mixer. And he did, and gave it to me for checking. I poured Coca-Cola on it and some beer on it to make sure it was reliable. That was my test. And I said, Rudy, this is great. Build it. And he did, and it became the standard of the industry. But not everyone listened to me. You know, there was years later when JBL bought Rain, they did the JBL mixer. I told them they should really produce it. And they stopped production. They said, we're making other things. We have Eon speakers that we're going to make in that factory, and we can't be making disco mixes because there isn't that much business in that field. And it was a big mistake because other people took over, and that mixer kind of faded from history. Anyway, technology went forward, and things changed in a very big way, and now we're into digital technology, which I'm not so sure is so terrific for sound reproduction. There are elements in digital that we seem to hear which we can't measure, and there's no question that the analog systems provide a better listening experience. But because digital is so much out there, and because it's so much less expensive, and you can't get the analog equipment so much anymore, we have no choice, just like driving the cars that we do with all these digital gadgets in there, where the companies speak to the cars directly, they bypass you completely. So it's going to be, we're just kind of a passenger. We're not really the doer anymore. And things are changing, and we have to adjust to it. That's how the modern times are. But getting back to what I was saying originally, the harmony in the music is really the key. And some people say music is defined by melody, rhythm, and harmony in order that you prefer. But I think the key to dancing in clubs is the harmony part, not the rhythm part, but the harmony part. Without harmony, you can't. You know how I learned that? Nobody told me. I didn't read it. I didn't go to college for it. I used to roller skate, and when I got on skates and they played rap, I couldn't skate. I could jump up and down, but I couldn't skate. When they put on James Brown, all of a sudden the body started moving, and I'm not even black. So, so the thing is that when I got on skates and they play that kind of music, and also Latin music was terrific for skating because it had harmony, and harmony is so obvious that I don't understand how DJs can play this music that they play without harmony. It just escapes me. So I think if you're going to have a good future, we're going to have to look for music that has harmony. And I don't care what kind of music it is. It could be from the mountains somewhere, from some armpit of misery in the world, but it's got to have harmony. That's what the DJs have to really look for.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Let's move over to Issy Sanchez. As all of you know, Issy has a tremendous amount of experience at record companies, and he's still very involved in the business. So tell us about your thoughts about when you first came into the business and why you came into it and what excited you about it.
I was 19 years old when I first got to Atlantic Records. I had already spent a year at Columbia Records. The dance scene was just starting to happen. When I was at Columbia Records, the Tramps were on a label called Golden Fleece that was distributed to Philly International. When I went to Atlantic, I took them with me. They went on to do Saturday Night Fever. And I was lucky enough when I got to Atlantic Records that we had a huge array of artists, from Donny Hathaway to Aretha Franklin to Bette Midler, throwing the Manhattan Trance for the Rolling Stones. They started doing up-tempo energy music, I guess, to get into the flow or to jump on the bandwagon, as we used to say back then. And again, back then, going back to his point about black and white, whether it was the OJs or Boss Gags, it didn't make a difference. If it was either good or it was bad. There was no black, there was no white, there was no hip-hop, there was no EDM. It was either good or bad, and you either loved it or you hated it, but you danced to it in the clubs, and it worked. And Atlantic Records, to their credit, was a major label who was more than eager to jump into the disco business. They were the first major label to do so. And I was like a kid in a candy store, quite frankly. After all those artists that I just mentioned, we just happened to add Cerrone and the Tramps, CJ and Company, Sister Sledge, Chic, And that list just grew all the way into 1980 when the disco era crashed. Supposedly, if I'm not mistaken, was still dancing, and I don't think it ever crashed. It's changed names, it's changed identity, it's changed tempo, but dance music has always been there. Having said that, today's music is kind of the watered down needle in a haystack process that we go through now. There's just so many platforms out there for people to create and be creative that finding the good stuff needs to be filtered even more than ever, unfortunately. Hey, what's up, Al? I didn't even know you were up there. Hey, what up? My boy, Al Pizarro. And so today, just anybody can go in their basement with a keyboard and a couple of outboard equipment and create a record and think they could be in the music business. And that is not the case. It still has to be good. Hey, Frank, I see you too. What up, Frank? He's sitting back there. It's not the case today. The records don't sell as much as they used to. There's a lot of platforms now for music to be exposed. So I guess to add to his, technology has enhanced many things, but also has created an open platform for everybody to do whatever the hell they want. And it's our job as promotion people or marketing people, like I said, to filter out the garbage and try to find the good stuff and get it played out there and create artists like the Chainsmokers and Daya and have artists like Wiz Khalifa segue into dance and EDM music. But hopefully music is healthy again. The music industry is healthy again. We had a 13% growth last year in sales. CD sales are down. Digital sales are up. Streaming is through the roof. So there's still money to be made out there. It's just a lot more people out there to filter through. And it was easy for me back then. I had to chase Joey Carvello around Boston. I had to chase Frank around Philly. I had to chase everybody around just to play my fucking records. Now you just send them an email. Hey, play my shit. That's pretty much the difference for me.
Okay, thanks, Issy. You know, in the late 60s and early 70s, if you think back, the clubs in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, New York City, there was no distinction. If you were a DJ in a hot club, it didn't matter if you were in one of those boroughs. You were a hot DJ in a hot club. So I go back to 1971. I was 17 years old, and I'm a little prejudiced to this guy. That's why I saved you for last, Richie, because I distinctly remember the first night I walked into the Gallery on 91st Street and 4th Avenue, and I walked into that club, and I said to my friends, this is great. There's booze, there's girls, and there's great music. And I said, where's the music coming from? And they said, well, there's a DJ, and he's in the back. I had no idea. I said, where's the band? And they said, there isn't. So I walk in the back, and I see this guy behind two turntables, and he had a railroad conductor's cap on. I remember that. You did. And it's really vivid memory. So I walked in the back, and I saw this guy, and I saw him playing all this music that he was playing tonight. And he's got all those 45s back here. And I said, were those the 45s that were actually sitting in that DJ booth 45 years ago? He said, they're the ones. So, Richie, tell us a little bit about how you got started and what it was like in the late 60s and early 70s and how exciting it was.
1969, I went to my first club in Manhattan on Christopher Street. It was called The Haven. It was downstairs in the basement, and that was where I first met Francis Grasso. I never seen anything like that in my life. You know, I was always around music. I grew up with Jimmy Iovine on Court Street. He now owns Interscope Records and doesn't want to talk to me anymore.
He's a billionaire.
So, yeah, that's right. He's a billionaire. But anyway, the bottom line is that I met Francis. I was a kid, and I never heard anything like that. I could tell you what he was playing. He was playing Don't Knock My Love by Wilson Pickett. He was playing Hot Pants from the Hot Pants James Brown album, Push and Pull, Rufus Thomas, all that kind of stuff. And I went back the following week, and I befriended him, and it was a great relationship. He had left the Haven. He had went to one club, and then he went to the Sanctuary. And in the Sanctuary, I used to go to the Sanctuary and sit alongside of him on the altar and watch everything he did. And he gave me my first playlist. You know, it had Chained by Marvin Gaye, Running Back and Forth by Edwin Starr,
That was exactly how he played it, too. Don't Bring Back the Memories by the Four Tops. It's a Shame. I mean, all that stuff he was playing. And he would let me play for maybe a half hour, maybe on a Friday, sometimes on a Saturday, you know. And that was the extent of that. So I started to think, I live in Brooklyn, and none of this is going on in Brooklyn. So one night I got this thought, and I went to start to search for a club. I went to Bay Ridge. I went to the gallery on 91st and 4th. And I walked into a place that had a jukebox in the middle of the floor. The bar was on the left-hand side. There were tables on the right-hand side, little dance area. And I asked for the owner. This guy, his name was Tony. He's an old guy. The bartender was Roger, and the son was Peter. And I went over and I started to talk. I said, "Can we talk?" And I started to talk to him about what was happening in Manhattan. And by God's grace, I don't know what it was, but he was interested. He took an interest. So I asked him, would they want to come with me to the club? And they said, yeah. So we went to the club. I'm knowing you, the Sanctuary opened up at 9 o'clock? Closed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. You know, they couldn't even believe it. So we get over there, I get them in, we go in, and they couldn't believe what was going on in this place, you know. He was convinced, he was sold. So he told me, what do I need to do? I said, well, we need to buy a Macintosh amplifier. We need to buy 2 Doran turntables. Before the Bozak, right? We had gotten a Shure microphone mixer, right? Doran Stanton cartridges, Altec Lansing speakers, but he wasn't convinced. So what Al is talking about, I was in the kitchen. They were passing here. I had the hat on, by the way, because I didn't want the hamburger grease to fall on my hair. So I used to wear a hat because it stunk in there. They used to walk by with the food, and I'd be playing records. So it was me against the jukebox. I won.
All right.
All right? I won. We won. We all won. That's how it went. So the bottom line was that they would give me 2 hours or a half hour and give the jukebox an hour. And it was actually me against the jukebox until people started to say, hey. You know, that's when we closed the club. They started to build a DJ booth. And that was it. You know, the club was rocking. You know, I friended Ronnie Coles from Colony Records. I used to make appointments with him at 1 o'clock in the morning. I would go there. He'd set everything on the side. There's some things. We had a little private thing where he would play for me, and some things that he thought I might like. And my budget was $80 a week for records. I played Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. That was my gig. And
How much did you make per night?
You don't want to know that.
Well, we all know what we made back in the day.
Yeah.
Because if I adjust it for inflation, it's probably about $5,000 a night.
There was no Ferrari in my driveway. Let's put it that way. You know, you know what it was back then? Maybe you can all identify with this. It was about the music. It was about that. Listen, whatever I got paid, I spent on records anyway. I never, it didn't matter. We used to the last dollar, the dollar bins in Philadelphia. I used to go all over to find music, you know. And I was very good friends with Mikey Capella, God bless him, and Stevie D from Tamberlane, and Alfie. I played in the jungle with Alfie, and that was the deal. You know, back then it was just a beautiful camaraderie with DJs, and you know what? New York was where it was at.
Richie, you were getting paid. I DJ for free in the parks in the Bronx just to get an audience.
Yeah, okay. There it is. It was about the music. It was about getting the people in there dancing. I wasn't a stingy DJ. I didn't put stuff on my record so people would say, what's that? You know, and I told everybody what I was playing. It didn't matter. I know some DJs that used to do stuff like that. Not tell anybody what they were playing. You know, and all. I never did that. Richie did that. No, he didn't do that. I'm like, he didn't do that. I'm only kidding. I love him. Yeah, here's another thing. They opened a club in Staten Island called Hadar. And they asked me to go and play there. I didn't have a car, so I couldn't go to Staten Island. So I stayed in Field Funnies. This is true.
Right, but what happened was Mike Pace worked at the Envoy East.
Yes.
He went to Hadar.
Yes, he
I went
did.
to the Envoy East on 44th Street and First Avenue, and you still feel funny. That's right.
That's right. Yeah. So that was it.
All right.
You know, the rest is history.
All right, we have a few minutes left, so I heard Issy talk about how it has not really ever changed. They may change the name. It doesn't say it's a disco any longer. But if you turn on Sirius Radio and listen to BPM and you hear all the up-tempo stuff, the beats per minute are much different than they were back in the mid to late 70s. So where do you guys see it going? Issy, where do you see this thing going in the future?
Well, you're talking genre specific now. There are channels and series that are just genre specific. But if you go to clubs now, even hip hop clubs, they have to have an open format set. They have to play the Rihannas, the Khaled's, and those kind of records, or any dance versions that are done of anything from Lana Del Rey to John Legend. It was the dance versions of those two particular records that carried the weight and made those hits. It wasn't the ballad versions. The ballads were played, and that's what identified the artist, but it was those dance versions that drove the young kids to buy those records and to turn them into hits.
Wow.
Anybody else in the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, I'd like to know what we'd be worth in EDM dollars today.
$250,000.
Yeah, because quite honestly, I don't care how big a crowd they draw. I don't get it. The musical comparison to what we played and what they play today, and Alex brought up the thing about harmony. The music we played had better harmony, better melodies, better production.
Real musicians.
Amazing vocalists. It pales in comparison to what we hear today. And call it old school, but I'm sorry.
Okay. On that note, we're going to end the panel. Let's hear it. Issy, Alex, Jerry, Richie, and Richie.
I would just like to add one thing to Jerry's. Also, the lyrics. In the early days,
You can sing along to it.
Brothers is going to work it out. Love epidemic. If there's hell below, we're all going to go. And on and on. Mercy, mercy me. What's going on? Love Train.
Where's Keith Carlos, who contributed to Ladies' Night? Talk about a song that stood the test of time. I mean, you know, he brought a couple of lines into the song that made it a classic that it is today. And the songs have stood the test of time, decades.